I'm really excited today. I have Yoonjee Koh on the talk with me. So Yoonjee is the director of Intermediate Architecture Studios and full-time faculty member at the Boston Architectural College, BAC. And in that BAC college, Yoonjee teaches architecture design studios and electives in architectural theory and visual representation. She's the founder of discursive efforts like conversation series, PostLoft, as well as the BAC Journal. Yoonjee is dedicated to enriching intellectual dialogue and collegiate culture within and beyond the classroom. So today I invited Yoonjee to discuss building community and designing distance studio classes. Hey Yoonjee, thank you so much for joining me on this talk.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me to this talk. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to have you, and I know that you have a lot to share about online education on the university level within America. So I'm going to roll to my first question. Can you tell us a little bit about the teaching program that you're a director of?
Yeah, sure. So I oversee the intermediate architecture studios at the BAC, which is our second and third year architecture programs here. And the BAC is actually one of the first institutions in the United States to roll out an online architecture program. Back in 2007, we received the first NAAB-accredited online M.Arch program, and we've been running it ever since. And that program is has a low-residency component where students and faculty fly in for a week in the beginning of the semester. And so we combine an on-site component where the students meet their instructors face-to-face for a week, and then for the rest of the semester, everything is online. We also rolled out a fully online architecture program last fall of 2019, where instead of having students fly in, especially when students couldn't get the appropriate visa or they were in life situations, had a young child, they couldn't exactly come in at the specific time that the school required them. So we rolled out a program where they were all online fully for the whole semester, and we've been running that since last fall.
Interesting. And the reason behind you went online was because most of the students are international?
Yeah, for the fully online program, about 70% of our students are international students, but mostly a lot of them are also in the States, and they have international passports. So the online program really provides a lot of flexibility for the students. Like, a lot of our students are working full-time. They're balancing a full-time job with this degree that they're trying to pursue. So it's just a great opportunity for our students to balance both their work and their studies.
That's excellent. And so most of the students are mature students already, or are they also first levels, you said?
Yeah, so all of the online students are master's students, which means that they have some background in studying architecture, and they're also almost always working at an architectural firm, so they have some kind of background. And a lot of them want to advance their careers and they want to pursue degrees, and that is, sometimes challenging when you're a full-time student and at a sort of a traditional college. But the benefit that an online program provides is that we have that flexibility that we can offer them. Some of our courses are taught asynchronously, which means that the students really just check in with the instructors at their own schedules and work at their own pace. So it's a good, way to learn things at your own pace. You can, for lectures, instead of going into a classroom and sitting in front of a blackboard, you can watch videos of lectures online and pause when something doesn't make sense or rewind it. So we find that actually some of our on-site students also, want to take some of our online lecture-based courses.
Funny you say, when something doesn't make sense. I think that the bigger problem here is sometimes our attention just escapes and we listen to something and then at some point we switch off. And I think that's the advantage that you really have when lectures are recorded. When you can go back to it, is to re-listen to the content, especially if there's something important being said and you simply didn't hear. And I think that that's that's one of the things that really online education can provide for us within teaching, that obviously you can never get in the analog experience. And it seems like you're the first guest I can really talk about this. So I'm gonna get a little bit deeper into this. From the experience teaching online, how do you find actually implementing all the practical aspects of architectural education? So I'm talking about studio work and specifically, the relationship of a mentor with a student in the process of understanding a little bit of the more practical side of things.
Yeah. Do you mean practical as in like studio community, studio culture?
Exactly.
Okay.
That, yeah, and also just the delivery of projects that are maybe a little bit more like location based or concept related. So it's not just the creation, for example, of 3D models and the actual execution, but the parts of studio cultures that relate very much to collaboration also. I think I extended this question so much more than what I meant at the beginning. But I hope that you understood and that you can elaborate on it, or we can just go deeper into this, because really, indeed, the reason why I wanted to talk with you is mainly to focus on the culture within the studio and how to maintain that virtually. So
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Before I go into online teaching, we have to acknowledge that some things work better on site and some things work better online. And I think, as teaching evolves, our job as educators is to find those key points that work best and sort of try to like work them in the classroom, whether it's on site or virtually. At the BEC, we try to teach the same learning lessons, the same projects, and the same site and concepts that you would teach in an on-site course online. So the students are working on the exact same projects and they're going at the same sort of pace as if they would just do it on site as well. In designing the course, however, I had to think about how certain learning lessons needed to shift in terms of their sequencing. For example, for an on-site studio, Architecture 2, for example, designs a community center. And the key learning lesson in Architecture 2 is to learn about spatial design and tectonics. And so we use a lot of physical models to teach the students how things are put together, what it means when a certain design is, made that way. That is kind of harder to do that on an online platform. It's, because we don't have that physical three-dimensional sort of physicality. The online program starts out with asking the students, what sort of qualities do you find in your own hometown that you could bring in and sketch and talk about on an online platform? So there has to be a little bit of rethinking that goes in when you teach online. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily sacrificing the learning lessons that you would teach, but in terms of the methods and how you would deliver things, those things have to be a little bit tweaked about. In terms of, delivering sort of the concepts that you would apply to a site, on site, with the students on site, it's easy to just hop on a train together and go to the site and take pictures and sketch and talk about it in person. Online, obviously, you can't really do that in the same degree. So I had to provide students with links to a lot of different background information about the site, the cultural sort of experiential background of, for example, if the site is in Boston, what does living in Boston mean for the regular resident? How do people walk? How do people, experience different cultures? And try to sort of communicate as much as possible to the students. I sent them like movie links, YouTube links, suggested like books to read. And then as if, it's just as if you were working in an office. Even if you can't go to a site, your job as an architect is to find out as much about the site, via databases or any sort of links online. So the students actually were able to find a lot more information about the site than the on-site students did. They went into Google Maps, walked around with a tiny human figure around the site, and they tried their best to sort of gather information about the site, even online. So I think, teaching online has its own sort of challenges and benefits, but at the same time, it does the job of training architects to sort of find out more about the site, to think about different design concepts, and to sort of test those out even in an online platform.
I find it extremely interesting, this example that you've given, because when you are introducing this whole generation of students into virtual sites and experiencing space through virtual realms, I wonder what effect can that have on the future of the way that they do business and practice architecture. Have you already had some examples of these people evolving into practice and doing things differently than in a traditional way? Because of the fact that they've been taught to think about architecture in this way?
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually say, sort of conducting business online through, emails and working through 3D models and sharing, screen shares for meetings have started more in practice. In fact, a lot of our students are working on international sites in their practice that they have to sort of rely on those online based data or meetings, virtual meetings, in order to move the project forward. So practice has evolved in a way so that this sort of online component is already in place in a lot of different firms, especially for bigger sort of corporate and also international projects. I think education is sort of catching up on that. And the question here is, all of these softwares are going to evolve in a number of years. We're always going to have new technologies, new softwares coming out that set the status quo. So us as designers, how do we sort of work with that changing, component? We are always going to have to sort of be trained in the newest software and sort of be called to think about international projects. The more the more global sort of our culture becomes. So I think it's important for also for schools to ask students to sort of work with that changing culture and teach them how to adapt to arising situations. I find that students who are able to sort of learn new softwares and be more open-minded about learning online and learning new softwares, or more able to sort of adapt to new situations, to new softwares and new tools as well. So really, we're not teaching them, new software sort of tools exactly, but also teaching them sort of ways to adapt to new situations and to sort of use new tools as well. And it's easy to assume that by just being on site, there's a sense of social community formed and something that can't be replicated online. When in fact, just being physically in the same classroom doesn't guarantee a classroom dynamic that is collaborative and understanding of all the members of the class. So students who are close friends with each other prior to the start of the course will more easily stay together than students who are entering the class for the first time. So the question here is like not really a distinction between on-site and online, but really a question of how do we encourage that sense of community and that sense of learning, and how do we be open to listen to one another and learn from each other and create a natural network together. And there's not a complete solution to this question, but I think it really starts with the sort of classroom instructor exemplifying that openness and to allow students to test out new technologies and tools and to learn from one another.
So I'm understanding that very much the process that you went through with integrating all of these technologies was very much about actually developing in a direction that technology altogether moves. And I think within practice and the way that we deliver projects, there's been already that transformation into digital. I doubt that anybody right now draws complicated plans by hand. So we use software, we use technology in order to deliver our projects. Obviously, renderings have given a great potential in the practice also to actually show visual communication. And I think that what you guys are doing is just integrating the tools that are available to us today in order to deliver education. And that leads me to a question: how do you feel about the fact that you guys are one of the very few around the world doing this? And here specifically, I ask because I find architectural industry very, very traditional, and there are certain things that we will develop quite quickly in, and others that we just kind of really slow to digest and really transform into. And like you said, I think bigger practices or practices that were a little bit like more forward thinking have implemented certain strategies, but there is many that don't. And so I really wonder, what do you think and how do you feel about the fact that that it's still such a rarity today to see this kind of practice within education?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a long time, online education was kind of seen as like the black swan, where, people sort of like knew that it existed, but didn't really, think much of it. And now we're in a situation where with the pandemic, we're in this sort of need to be online, in order to continue education. With that, if we didn't have these tools, schools would have just shut down. We wouldn't have been able to continue some of our teaching as we did this past March and even now. So I think being online is turning into a necessity more and more, especially with the start of the pandemic. But as we're sort of testing things out in the current situation, we're finding out things that work more effectively online and things that don't work as well. So I think it's sort of important to recognize the benefits and the challenges of both teaching online and on-site, and sort of marrying those two together and finding what really works and how should we go forward if something else happens, and how can we adapt to new situations. Yeah.
No, I was just, on that thought, I wanted to ask, because, you talk about this concept of testing it. And I think that this is a really important factor in order to really arrive at answers and see what works and what doesn't. So since you've done it already before COVID and you have more experience than a lot of faculty that is just implementing it today, what were the main lessons that you learned? Something that definitely doesn't work and something that perhaps actually works better this way. And here I also want to know a little bit more about like the way the curriculum gets structured and the actual management of the information, the education that gets passed to the student, because I can imagine that the delivery can be completely different to what it is in a physical location.
Yeah, so to talk about sort of the methods and how online teaching happens and the curriculum, um, students, meet with their instructors at their own schedules at least once a week through this sort of Zoom meeting where they're sharing their screen, they're talking about the diagrams and the drawings, and they're taking pictures of the models that they've made, and the instructor, is able to sketch over that or talk with them and interact in person-to-person interaction. There's also a lot of emailing, a lot of like communication that happens. So, each of our class sizes are held very small, between 1 to 3 students, 1 faculty to 3 students, or at most 1 to 6 or 8 students for studios. So it really, is sort of programmed to customize the learning lessons to the students. And it's not just the instructor sending out information to the students. It's a lot of like working back and forth, which I think has been working really well. A lot of our students, because the BAC has run this program since 2007, I think we're in a unique position where we can see, how online teaching works beyond the pandemic. And we find that a lot of students are able to continue their education despite all the life events that happen. We had one student who got married, pregnant, and gave birth during the whole program. And she was also working full time throughout the whole situation. So, that is sort of, hard to do when you're sort of taking a class on site and you're also working at a full time, you're working full time at a different firm. It's also interesting to see, how the on-site students and the online students, how their work compares. And, because when you're online, you have to be able to present your work on a screen and sort of, use images and talk through them. I find a lot of our online students are great presenters too. And it's sort of different in a sense where, in an on-site setting, you can roll in with your models and, tracing paper and sort of think through different problems with the instructor. Online, you can do the same thing, but you have to be very clear about what your questions are and what your sort of, processes that you need more help are in. So there's a little bit of more clarity and that requires for students to be online. And so in the end, when students are presenting their work weekly to an instructor, we also hold midterm reviews and final reviews and pinups online. So, they're being naturally trained to become great presenters and great sort of speakers through the online program, which I think it really helps. And we can see the difference by the time that they go to thesis, and they're also working full time. So they're testing out those skills in their job sites as well. Yeah.
No, this is really interesting. One of the reasons because I only have a BA, and I'm 32, so I can't really imagine myself now this advanced into my career to take 2 years out and do my master's, but I really want to, and this is really what also got me very interested in this topic, because my mind is baffled from the fact that we only have so few faculties. I think it's only 4 in America that are actually teaching online masters, and other than that, and obviously you guys are one of them, and other than that, around the world, it's not that I heard of at the moment. So we have a lot of catching up to do as the whole industry of architectural education, I think. And we already live in the era that all of these things are easily accessible and also everyday used. So it's not really like we would have to obtain some magical skills to connect and actually deliver these processes. I think it's very much about, understanding how to. And so that actually leads me to another question I wanted to ask very specifically in terms of the delivery of the course. Do you mainly teach live and show up for your students live, or did you also record part of the faculty into courses that were pre-planned and they teach very specific topics that perhaps are somewhere in the library or a membership site, and students can, as part of the learning, they can access?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. For courses like structures, detailing, construction, where there's a specific sort of lesson, week by week lesson that students need to grasp, those are more pre-recorded. At the same time, the instructors are available for students to ask questions, and they're really there to work through questions and problems with the students. Studio is a more sort of customized setting, in a sense that it really depends on the skills that the students bring in and the sort of personalities that they have and what they're interested in trying to form the studio course. We try to balance a lot of synchronous and asynchronous learning, which I think is key to this. You have to be able to give students flexibility and work on their assignments at their own pace, but at the same time, there has to be some sort of sort of customization and personalization that needs to happen online. Because I think, the one thing that I guess the main question that I always receive is, how do you create that community and the sort of bond that can really happen better in person? And I actually find that, when you're talking to someone in their own personal space, even through a screen, I've had so many times when, their dog walks in, and or their cat sort of like it covers the screen, and their children work in, you see their sort of partners, and you see a whole dimension that you wouldn't see sitting in an office like at a school. So, so seeing that sort of dimension that you can only really do online at so sort of like coincidentally and so naturally, it builds a different sort of character when you're interacting with students online. Um, you know, because all of this online program allows for that flexibility, students are also, more open to sharing their sort of like, home furniture or whatever they see beyond the screen in the background of their lives. um, Actually during the pandemic, each of our students had some sort of friends or family that were affected by the pandemic. And we also had students who had to relocate during the pandemic, because we have international students who are based in China, and they wanted to come back to the US to be with their family. We had international students who are based in the US, but they had to fly out, to Abu Dhabi to be with their family. And so everything was changing. They were going through quarantine. They were sort of looking for new places, and they were moving in all during this pandemic. But the only thing that didn't change was the weekly meetings that they had with their online instructors. And that sort of solid ground was the only thing that was stable for them during the whole sort of situation, which I think is, it's kind of really special to be able to have that bond even online, and to able to like really get to know someone who is located in a totally different global setting. It's really easy to just sort of dismiss, international events that happen. It's just another article on the news. But when you meet someone who's based in that location and you hear their personal stories, it just gives you a different sort of context to work with. And I think architecture as a field of study, in essence, is trying to understand different lifestyles, different spaces, and how people sort of experience, different spaces. And being online allows for that diversity, that diverse, to get to know diverse people, to understand diverse contexts, and you also get a chance to sort of gain that diverse perspective yourself.
And I think this is like a really big topic that a lot of people have been discussing, and perhaps the actual point of resistance lays within that. The what are we really losing from the human experience of space and one another if we move virtual? And I really love your story, because it actually presents things that I value as well. I spend a lot of time right now online talking to people. And it's true, you have a peek into their personal life, and you see them also so much more relaxed and different. Actually, there's a different side to this experience than when we meet somewhere in a physical location, perhaps, especially if it's like business oriented or networking. There is like a different side of us also that's put forward. So that's great. And as I lead these conversations, I hear a lot of topics as well about tuitions, and I wanted to ask you about that, because I think one of the worries of faculty moving digital is how to price it, and if it still has the same value and worth, and how could that digitalizing education affect the pricing of education. Can you share your experience on that, and also what the model is in America? I think most of the listeners do as well, and the cost of education, and how is that impacted or perhaps influenced the tuition fees that you guys have, and what was the process behind it as well?
Yeah, so the BAC's mission is to make design education available to wide populations and communities. So by model, our tuition is lower than most institutions. And I'm not sure of, the tuitions of other online programs. Um, but we try to make, education available to a widely different group of, social and societal populations, which I think is one of the deriving factors for creating the online program itself. Just the fact that it provides flexibility and the students are able to work full time, sort of gives them an opportunity to, fund themselves for the life-related costs that they have to spend. I actually did my studies in a, traditional institution where it was really, you have to be a full-time student and you can't really work full-time at all. And in fact, working part-time was a struggle too, because you have all these assignments and you're expected to be at certain places for lectures and studio for, we had 6-hour studios that you have to be present during those times. So I think just by being online and providing that flexibility, it opens up a dimension for a lot of single parents and a lot of students who are in need of earning more income for their houses to be able to do that while still pursuing their degree.
And I think that's a very important factor, really, because one thing is, for me personally, I don't think I would want to go to full-time education, mainly because I'm getting used to the way I live, the longer I'm in practice. And I think it would be a huge compromise to become a full-time student again. Admittedly so for the reason of finances, but also a lifestyle that I'm not sure at this age I'm ready to live again, being a full-time student and having to manage my personal life accordingly to that. So exactly, I think it's a really big aspect, benefit of it, and it surely allows to even out a little bit the earnings with the spending related to education. But do you feel that it could have moving digital with education, could that have an influence on the general economy of how education in architecture is priced?
Yeah, I've never really thought of that question, but that's a great question. Um, you know, when movies, first, or for example, when videotapes, I think, first came out, people were wondering whether people would go to movies anymore. And when like newspapers started to display their articles on a website, people started to wonder, well, people ever read, physical, paper newspapers anymore? And I think the more sort of resources and opportunities that you provide to different people, even if it's online, it just opens up people to a different sort of dimension that they seek that more. And it doesn't disregard the original sort of in-person physical experience that you're able to have. It just opens up a new dimension that allows people to enjoy. So I don't think online education is necessarily there as an enemy to replace on-site, but I do think there has to be certain recognition in both, the benefits and the challenges in both, that sort of recognizes, okay, what are we doing well in both of these and what can we do better in both of these to really understand how education is going to take place in the next generation as well.
Absolutely. And I think, because I provide online training and I know how that has transformed the way that I actually think about what I teach. It's interesting because I feel that the repetitive part of my teaching, I can put on automation by recording courses around this and just putting it on the platform and trading logging details, which essentially saves me a lot of energy and time to develop as a human being, develop new programs as well for my students, but partially as well to manage my day differently and my life differently around this. But then, here's the question, I think, and I think it very much will apply to faculty. If you record something once and put it out there, does it have the same value as it is when you send a human being to repeat that information to a class in a live setting? And so I think that, here's kind of where my question comes from is, are we going to value it more because now we can give 100% of ourselves to coaching and leading the students through this process? Yes, they can learn something on autopilot. Like you said, your university teaches, details and engineering things. That's something that's very methodological and easy to explain. But then there is this thing that you cannot replace, which is the actual mentorship and the attention that you need to give your students, and also the specific questions you need to answer. And I would argue that from my own experience, that I'm more effective if I show up for an hour or two of coaching per day than if I was to be in, a certain university or a location for 6-7 hours dealing with people all the time and having to give my energy to explain, but also to answer questions. I think that the quality of yourself, we're just not able to do it, at that same level of attention. And so I think that, I very much see this concept as something that could also shape the way we actually plan for studying and the way we plan the deliverance of the education, but also perhaps heap a lot of benefit into the quality of teaching that can be provided, and also time management around it. So how much more can we learn or teach if we have more time for it? That's also an interesting aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when we're sort of designing the online courses, we had to be very mindful about what's the maximum time frame that we want to have students stare at the screen and listen to these lectures. And I find, when you're in a class for an hour, that's different from staring at your screen for a footage of someone just speaking to you for an hour. It's just so easy to lose your attention span. So we had to get creative of how to break down lessons and ask for sort of, moments for students to respond to those lessons. And then as we're doing that, I was also thinking about, well, these poor students on site, they're in classes, lectures for 3 hours, and you can tell by the end of that class, they're just drained. So it's that thinking of how to grab students' attentions and how to make learning effective, especially through these long lectures, was taking place in both on-site and online. I think there were both lessons that we had to learn in both formats of learning. And I think that's a valuable lesson. It's just easier to recognize that sort of component when you're thinking about the online format, but then at the same time, you recognize the sort of things that you could do better on site as well, which I think has been really sort of helpful for me as an educator in sort of thinking about what really works well for our students.
Absolutely. And indeed, it's a whole process to go through in order to plan it out. And, you live through it and you learn from it. That's basically the bottom line. Right. But yeah, thank you so much for showing up for us and sharing this experience. It's very insightful. And for anyone interested in the program, where do they go?
They go to www.thebac.com. And
excellent.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me too. It was such a pleasure talking to you, Sarah. I hope I was helpful about explaining more about online teaching.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.